Well, I get to be here for yesterday and today, speaking to students and whatnot. And this morning, my wife got a phone call. We live in downtown, or we live in Tulsa. She works in downtown Tulsa, and we got a bomb threat. So, my wife got evacuated from her office. She's an adoption attorney, and got sent out of the downtown area. And that's exciting when you're away from home, and those kind of fun things happen. As if I've seen anything over the last decade plus of my life, nothing rings more true than God's got you, and God's going to continue to work you through every situation that you go through. But the big picture is you might not know what's next, but that each step is an opportunity to love and to just be fully ingrained in where you're at right then. If God's not real, if God's not present, if God doesn't really exist, then all these other situational problems that arise in our life, in our day-to-day, car breaking down, or somebody, running through your yard, or whatever, becomes a bigger deal, because that's the only thing that matters right now. If there's nothing bigger than this whole thing, if there's nothing bigger than your day-to-day, that being God and a purpose for your life, then ultimately I think we can blow the littlest things out of proportion and get bent out of shape about things. But if God's real, if God exists, if God desires to be present in your life in the day-to-day, it seems to shrink some things that we find important and rather magnify things that maybe we didn't think is as important before. Loving others, figuring out what the way we can connect deeper with God in a relationship, and how we can love others better through those moments. There's a moment that we see in Job's life that's shaky, where he starts going, hold up, maybe this isn't where it's at. God says, well, ask me some questions. And I think Job's a great example of what we want to be, and that is we want to be steadfast, yet all of us get shaken at some point by the phone call. And when the phone call's deep enough, when the phone call's big enough, we do get shaken, just like Job. But the cool thing was God, throughout that entire story, continues to come back and go, but I never left, and that I'm in control, and that things are going to go on that maybe are outside your control, but that ultimately they're not outside of my control. And Job sees that. And so there is significant loss that took place for Job, and he had to process that and work through that. But he gains more, if you will, on the flip side, but he still has the scars, I would say, from the hurt, from the pain. But at the same time, he gets to move forward because of his steadfast faith. And so what's the thing that continues to make our heroes in scriptures consistent is that when God is with them and they're present, no matter what the circumstance is, no matter how things get carried away or taken out of their world, those that stay consistent to going, God's real, God's present, God's involved, continue to come back around full circle at some point. We have a calling in our lives that seems to be consistent over the last several hundred years, just recently, going, who now? Who is going to stand up to move in, not the next phase, but like you said, the same level of faith, the same level of courageous movement. Never is there, I don't wake up in the middle of the night and say, man, I'm so hungry and there's no food in the house. No, I can go to the fridge and there's something in there. There's something in the cabinets that we can eat. Yeah, I spend a lot of time in Haiti, and these kids wake up in the middle of the night, and there is nothing. They're on the dirt floor. They're in a 20 by 20 house with 3 or 4 other siblings and maybe 1 or 2 other adults in their lives, and they don't have anything. So the point is there's an opportunity there for God to show up in really huge ways. And maybe we're at a point where finally God's going to have to show up. End racism, end pain in the sense of some of the social injustice that continues to take place in the 21st century. So I go back to say, can we have, like you said, heroes of the faith today? Yes, but it's going to take individuals that A, don't have all of their needs already met, and B, are praying big enough prayers that only God's going to be able to show up. And do we have that kind of faith again to do that? What a cool opportunity to not put God in a box, but instead, when God calls us to something, to step out with courage and then pray like crazy that he shows up. Because if he doesn't, we're embarrassed. But what's the worst case? We're embarrassed. God's not embarrassed. And that's one of those interesting moments for me when you really think about it. Do I have that kind of faith? Can I live that courageously? Can I walk away from things that I found passionate at one time and now have realized that God's calling us to new things? And I see that in my life over and over and over. So now the question is, will I have that kind of faith today as I continue to move on with my job and with different things that I take part in? I think it probably takes faith to see the real needs of others. I think that we think needs often are food. Needs are often helping me pay the rent. Need is often helping me get a vehicle back in a position where, flat tire or whatever, that we find those are needs because we filled our life or filled our day with these things to do to get us to the next thing. Yeah, it's necessary that we have a job and that we pay our mortgage and we do these different things, but are those the needs? So let's go back again and let's look at the Old Testament heroes. Did they have those needs? Well, clearly they still had a place to live and these things that they had to take care of. But how many more things today do we define as needs that just weren't present before? And so can we have faith that God's going to show up and meet all the needs that we really have, which means we might have to die to ourselves a little bit with our income, might be die ourselves a little bit with financial stability for the future. Retirement, is that God's plan for us to not again have a need once we retire because we have a Social Security, we have retirement taken care of? Bible's really clear to take care of the widows and the orphans, to take care of the elderly, to take care of the poor, and yet we as an entire culture in America have created an environment where you make enough now so you can take care of yourself later and no one has to band together to be a community. All of those we're going to worry about unless we give them to God and say, am I doing what God's called me to do? And do I really believe that God loves me more than the sparrows in the sky or the lilies in the field? That's a difficult question to ask, and ultimately one that every one of us has to answer.